I just want to return once more to something I've been talking about in the last couple of videos to do with poetics. And I want to return particularly to a video I made last night, about Gaston Bachelard and these two books, the Poetics of Space and the Poetics of Reverie. And in the last video I was trying to untangle the difference, which is probably a really simple difference, but I'm just kind of stuck on it really. So I'm just kind of trying to rehearse again the application, the differences in the application of the word poetics to those two titles, how they operate differently. I think the key difference for me is that in the Poetics of Space, the technique is to draw on phenomenological experience, fully sensorially embodied experiences, to derive the structure of a kind of poetics. And so some of the examples that I've talked about is the fully embodied phenomenological experience of this vertical dimension as up as opposed to down, and how the sense of up has some consistencies, resistance to gravity, movement towards the light, movement away from the earth, movement in a position to where you can see a greater distance, as opposed to down, which again has some consistencies, giving in to gravity, movement to a position where you're perhaps seeing less, perhaps moving towards a place which is slightly safer, moving towards a place which is slightly darker, and lots of other associations with the lower depths, so to speak, as opposed to the upper reaches. So a Poetics of Space that Bachelard talks about, that use of the word poetics, would derive poetic inferences from that kind of an embodied experience. So from just to follow that, we could talk about height, for example, going upwards, moving towards the light. It would be relatively consistent and appropriate to use that term in, for example, to talk about higher states of consciousness, for example. It's used quite a lot in that. I mean, the idea that states of consciousness can be higher tends to infer seeing further, having greater visual access, kind of visual knowledge access, heavily associated with light, perhaps resistance, perhaps movement away from the earthbound body. So that's a kind of poetic application of embodied experience to that part of the vertical dimension, and that essentially, I think, is what Bachelard's doing in the Poetics of Space. It's that kind of deriving of a poetic from an embodied experience. The other book I mentioned, Poetics of Reverie, in which he kind of takes on states of consciousness between waking and sleeping, doesn't do that. It's more of a case of an application. There's no fully embodied experience that reverie can occupy. There's not. We all have reveries, but it's not embodied in the same way. It's not sensorially available in the way that height is sensorially available and phenomenologically available. And so, rather than reverie being drawn upon as the source of poetry and the source of poetic allusions and inferences and entailments, it's the site for the application of those things. So reverie becomes a state, and the word state is important. State means location, or implies location. And the location for reverie, as I said yesterday in this other video, for Bachelard, the state of reverie is a location somewhere on the hill between the state of waking consciousness, which is at the top of the hill where the light is, and the state of sleep, which is at the bottom of the incline, perhaps even on the ground. So again, just to rehearse that distinction, whereas the Poetics of Space uses embodied phenomenological experience as the source of poetic understandings and allusions and metaphors and structures, the Poetics of Reverie is an example of the application of those kinds of poetic allusions to what would otherwise be an abstract and difficult to conceptualize set of phenomena.